June 18th, 1945. Southern Okinawa, Gamma Cave. The darkness was absolute. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, blood, and human waste. I pressed my back against the cold limestone wall, trying to make myself smaller, trying to disappear into the stone itself. My stomach had stopped hurting 3 days ago. A bad sign, I knew. When hunger stops feeling like pain and starts feeling like nothing, that's when your body begins eating itself. I am Yuki Nakamura, 28 years old, an elementary school teacher from Shuri. Or I was. I don't know what I am now. June 18th, 1945. If I die here in the darkness, let it be known, I lied to them. I taught the children lies, and now they are dead. If you think you know the Battle of Okinawa, this perspective will shatter everything. Subscribe and comment below. This gets impossibly devastating before it gets hopeful. You need to hear what happened next. 7 weeks. That's how long the hell had lasted. 7 weeks since the American invasion turned Okinawa into what survivors would later call the Typhoon of Steel. 7 weeks of artillery that never stopped, of bombs that fell like rain, of a sky that burned orange every night. But it was the last 7 days that had brought me to this cave, hiding in darkness with maybe 40 other civilians, old men, women, children too young to have been conscripted. 7 days since we'd run from our village as it was consumed by the battle. 7 days since I'd had a real meal. The cave, we called it a gamma, natural limestone formations that honeycomb Okinawa's southern tip, had become our tomb. We'd fled here believing the propaganda we'd been fed for months. The Americans were devils. They would torture us, rape the women, kill the children, eat our flesh. Death was preferable to capture. I had taught these lies to children. That knowledge sat in my stomach heavier than hunger ever could. 3 months earlier, I'd been standing in front of my classroom in Shuri, teaching 42 children aged 6 to 12. The school was modest but well-maintained, with wooden floors that creaked and windows that looked out over terraced fields stepping down toward the sea. My students wore their school uniforms, boys in dark jackets and caps, girls in sailor-style dresses. Their faces were bright, eager, trusting. They believed every word I said, because I was sensei, teacher, authority. That morning, I was teaching them how to die. When the American devils come, I said, reading from the approved curriculum the military government had distributed to all schools, they will show you no mercy. They are not human like us. They are beasts who kill for pleasure. Little Kenji, 8 years old with a gap-toothed smile, raised his hand. Sensei, why do they hate us? Because we are superior, I answered, the lies flowing smoothly from months of repetition. Because our Yamato Damashi, our Japanese spirit, threatens their corrupt civilization. They fear us, so they must destroy us. What should we do if they come? Asked Mariko, 10 years old, who always sat in the front row. This was the part I hated most, though I never let it show on my face. If capture is inevitable, you must choose honor over shame, death over dishonor. Your family's honor, Japan's honor, the emperor's honor, all depend on your courage. I was teaching children to commit suicide rather than surrender. The military had been clear. Every civilian was expected to resist the invasion to the death. They'd distributed hand grenades to families, not to fight with, but to kill themselves with when the Americans came. Schools were instructed to prepare students mentally for gyokusai, shattering the jewel, the euphemism for honorable death. I taught these lessons every day for 3 months. At night, alone in my small room in the teacher's dormitory, I would sometimes allow myself to think the thoughts I could never speak. This is madness. These are children. Why are we teaching them to die? But in the morning, I would return to the classroom and teach the curriculum, because that's what teachers did. We followed orders. We maintained discipline. We served the greater good. I told myself I had no choice. That was the first lie. April 1st, 1945, Easter Sunday. The Americans called it L-Day. We called it the beginning of the end. I was at school when the bombardment began. Not the school itself, but the sound of it rolling across the island like thunder that wouldn't stop. The naval guns firing from hundreds of ships offshore, the bombs from planes that filled the sky like locusts. Classes were canceled immediately. Students were sent home to their families. Teachers were ordered to report to emergency civilian defense positions. For the first week, the fighting was in the north and middle of the island. Shuri, in the south, remained relatively intact. We could hear the battle, see smoke rising from the north, feel the ground shake from distant explosions, but we weren't in it yet. That changed in May. The American forces pushed south, toward the Shuri line, where the Japanese 32nd Army had established its main defensive positions. Our city became the center of the typhoon. The bombardment was unlike anything human beings were meant to survive. Shells fell constantly, hundreds per minute during the worst barrages. Buildings that had stood for centuries disintegrated. The ground itself seemed to liquefy from the concussion. And with the battle came the orders. All civilians must support the war effort. Women and children were to carry supplies, dig trenches, care for wounded soldiers. Teachers were to maintain morale, prevent defeatism, ensure the population understood their duty. I watched families receive their grenades, the ones meant for suicide if capture seemed imminent. I watched mothers weep as they accepted them, knowing what they were for. I watched fathers explain to young children how to pull the pin. I said nothing, did nothing, taught nothing except what I was told to teach. That was the second lie, the lie of compliance, of claiming I had no agency, no responsibility. By late May, Shuri was being destroyed, building by building, street by street. The castle, the ancient symbol of Okinawan identity, the seat of the Ryukyu kingdom before Japan annexed it, was obliterated. The school where I taught was hit by artillery on May 27th. The building I'd worked in for 5 years collapsed into rubble in seconds. 3 of my fellow teachers died in that strike. I survived because I'd been in a different part of the building, helping move supplies to a military aid station. After that, organized education ceased to exist. The military ordered all remaining civilians to evacuate south, toward the caves and coastal cliffs where they said we could find safety. Safety was a lie. They were pushing us toward the killing ground, toward the place where the final desperate resistance would happen. They wanted civilians in the way, wanted us as human shields, wanted our deaths to be part of the propaganda about American brutality. We walked south in a column of refugees. Thousands of people, mostly women, children, and elderly. The men were either already dead, conscripted into the military, or pressed into the WWII, the local defense units that were essentially suicide squads armed with bamboo spears. I walked with a group of my students and their families. The children looked to me for guidance, for reassurance. I smiled at them and told them everything would be fine. That was the third lie. The Gamma, the limestone caves, became our refuge and our prison. There were hundreds of caves in southern Okinawa, and thousands of civilians crowded into them, seeking shelter from the bombardment. Some caves were large enough to hold hundreds of people. Ours was medium-sized, maybe able to hold 60 uncomfortably. We entered on June 11th, as American forces closed in on our area. The Japanese soldiers told us to hide there, to stay silent, to wait for victory or death. The cave was dark, damp, and immediately cramped. Families claimed spaces along the walls. We had almost no food, some rice, a few sweet potatoes, whatever people had managed to carry. No real water source, just what we'd brought in containers. The first day, we rationed carefully. A handful of rice per person. Sips of water. We would make it last, we told ourselves. The battle couldn't continue much longer. By the 3rd day, the food was gone. By the 5th day, the water was gone. By the 7th day, people began dying. Not from violence, from hunger, thirst, disease. The old died first. Then the very young. We had no medicine, no supplies, no way to help them. We wrapped bodies in whatever cloth we had and moved them to the back of the cave, deeper into the darkness. I sat in that darkness and thought about Kenji with his gap-toothed smile, about Mariko in the front row, about all 42 children I'd taught to die with honor. Were they already dead? Had they used the grenades their families were given? Had they jumped from the cliffs as the propaganda instructed? Or were they hiding in caves like this one, slowly starving? I had taught them that Americans were devils who would torture and kill them. What if I had been wrong? What if my lies had sentenced them to death? June 18th. The day everything changed. Started like the previous 7. In darkness, hunger, and the distant thunder of artillery. Someone near the cave entrance whispered that the sounds of battle had moved. The explosion seemed farther away now, the gunfire more sporadic. Maybe the Americans had moved past us. Maybe we'd been forgotten, or maybe they were coming. Around midday, we'd lost precise track of time in the darkness. We heard something new, not explosions, not the whistle of incoming shells. Voices, English, Americans. Panic rippled through the cave. Women grabbed their children, pulling them deeper into the darkness. Old men clutched bamboo spears they'd hidden, knowing they were useless but unable to let go of the final gesture of resistance. I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. This was it. This was the moment we'd been warned about, prepared for, taught to fear above all else. The devils had found us. The voices grew louder, footsteps near the entrance, then light. Flashlight beams cutting through the darkness, impossibly bright after days in the black. Hello? The voice was young, male, speaking English. Anyone in here? We're not going to hurt you. We have food, water, medical help. No one moved. No one breathed. More voices, speaking to each other in English. Then one trying Japanese, heavily accented but comprehensible. We are American. We help. No hurt. Food, water. Come out. It was a trick. It had to be a trick. They would lure us out, then slaughter us. That's what devils did. But then I smelled it. Food, real food, cooking, meat maybe, or stew. Something that made my stomach, which had been empty for days, suddenly wake up and scream with need. A little girl near the entrance started crying. Not the quiet, suppressed crying we'd all learned in the cave, but loud, desperate sobs. Her mother tried to quiet her, but hunger and fear had broken through the child's discipline. One of the Marines, I could see his silhouette now in the light from outside, moved toward the sound slowly, hands raised to show they were empty. "It's okay," he said in broken Japanese. "No hurt. We have food for child. Hungry?" The little girl's mother made a sound between a sob and a scream, pulling her daughter back. The Marine didn't advance further. Instead, he set something down on the cave floor. A can, I could see the shape, and backed away. "Food," he said. "For you. No hurt." Then he retreated to the cave entrance and waited. We stared at the can like it was a bomb. Minutes passed. The Marines didn't advance, didn't shoot, just waited with the patience of people who had nowhere else to be. Finally, an old man, Tanaka-san, who'd been a farmer, crawled forward, grabbed the can, and retreated quickly. His hands shook as he examined it in the dim light from the entrance. "It's food," he whispered. "American military rations. Canned meat. It's poisoned," someone hissed. "They're trying to kill us." But Tanaka-san was beyond caring. He managed to open the can. It had a key attached, and the smell of cooked meat filled the cave. He took a bite, then another, then began eating desperately, tears running down his face. We waited for him to die. He didn't die. He ate and cried and lived. The Marines set down more cans, more food, canteens of water. "Come out when ready," the one who spoke Japanese said. "We have doctor. Have food. No hurt Japanese people. War is ending. Come out safe." Then they left the entrance, pulling back to give us space, though I could hear their voices just outside, talking to each other in English. We stayed in the cave for another hour, paralyzed by fear and disbelief. The food sat there. The water sat there. Proof that maybe, possibly, the last 7 weeks of propaganda had been wrong. Slowly, people began to move, first to the food, opening cans with shaking hands, drinking water in desperate gulps, then toward the entrance, drawn by light and the impossible hope that the nightmare might be ending. I was among the last to move, my legs weak from days of sitting, my mind still unable to process what was happening. At the cave entrance, I blinked against the brutal sunlight. The landscape that had been familiar was now unrecognizable. Trees stripped to bare trunks, earth churned up by shells, buildings reduced to foundations, and Marines, dozens of them, in dusty uniforms, some standing guard, others setting up what looked like a field station. One Marine, young, maybe 20, with red hair and freckles, approached slowly as I emerged. He had a medical kit and a canteen. "Ma'am," he said in terrible Japanese. "You hurt? Need doctor?" I stared at him. He was supposed to be a devil. He was supposed to torture and kill me. Instead, he was offering me water. "Drink," he said, holding out the canteen. "Please. You dehydrated." My hand reached for the canteen without conscious thought. The water was warm, tasted like metal, and was the most beautiful thing I'd ever experienced. I drank too fast, choked, drank more. The Marine smiled, a gentle, concerned smile. Slow, slow. Too fast makes sick. Other Marines were helping other civilians, giving them water, opening rations. One was treating an old woman's infected wound. Another was carrying a child who couldn't walk. None of them were killing anyone. None of them were torturing anyone. They were helping. Everything I'd taught. Everything I'd believed. Everything I'd told the children. Lies. All lies. The Marine who'd given me water was talking to someone with a clipboard. Taking names, I realized. Recording who was here. Then he turned back to me. "You speak English?" he asked, hearing something in my silence. "Little," I admitted. "I was teacher. English language." His face brightened. "Teacher. Good. We need teachers. Many children here. Need help. You help us?" The words stuck. How could I help? I'd taught children to die. I'd fed them propaganda. I'd prepared them for suicide. "What his name?" he asked gently. "Yuki," I whispered. "Yuki Nakamura." He wrote it down carefully. "Miss Nakamura, we have food for you. Then we take you to civilian camp. Safe place. Food, water, medicine. Okay? Why?" The question burst out before I could stop it. "Why help us? We are enemy." The Marine looked confused by the question. "You're civilians, not soldiers. Not your fault there's a war. Just people who need help." He paused, struggling with Japanese words. "War is soldiers fighting soldiers, not soldiers killing people. You understand?" I didn't understand, but I nodded anyway. "Come," he said, gesturing toward where other civilians were gathering. "Food first, then questions." I followed him, legs weak, mind reeling, to where Marines had set up a feeding station. They had stacks of ration boxes, large containers of water, even a field kitchen producing something hot. Another Marine, this one older with sergeant stripes, handed me a tray. On it, a tin plate with beans, some kind of meat and gravy, crackers, and a small can of fruit. More food than I'd seen in 2 months. I stared at it. My hands wouldn't move. The sergeant said something in English to the red-haired Marine, who translated, "You can eat. Is okay. Not poisoned. See?" He took a cracker from a similar tray and ate it himself. "Good food. You eat." I couldn't move. My brain was screaming at me to eat. My stomach was cramping with need, but my hands wouldn't cooperate. 7 days of starvation. 7 weeks of terror. 28 years of being taught that Americans were inhuman devils, and here they were, feeding me. The tears came suddenly, violently. I collapsed to my knees, still holding the tray, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. All the fear, all the hunger, all the lies, all the guilt, it poured out in gasping, choking sobs that I couldn't control. The red-haired Marine knelt beside me, concerned. "You okay? You hurt?" "I taught them," I gasped in Japanese, then in broken English. "I taught the children. Lies. I told them you would kill them. I told them to die. And they believed me. Because I was teacher. They trusted me." He didn't understand all the words, but he understood the grief. He put a gentle hand on my shoulder. Not threatening, just human contact. Human comfort. "War is over soon," he said quietly. "War make everyone lie. Everyone scared. Not your fault. You live now. That is important. You live, you help make better." I sobbed harder, unable to explain that living felt like the cruelest punishment possible, that I should have died in that cave, that I didn't deserve his kindness, but he just stayed there, patient, until the sobbing subsided. Then he helped me to my feet, made sure I still had my tray of food, and guided me to a place to sit. "Eat," he said firmly but kindly. "Then we talk more. But first, eat." So I ate. I ate American military rations, provided by the enemy I'd demonized. served by men I'd taught children to fear. And the food was good, and that somehow made everything worse. By evening, maybe 200 civilians had emerged from caves in the area and been brought to the temporary assembly point. The Marines had set up tents, a medical station, and continuous food service. A chaplain moved among us, offering comfort in broken Japanese. Medics treated wounds, gave out medicine, did what they could for people ravaged by weeks of war. I sat with a group of women from various villages, all of us in shock, processing what was happening. Around us, children were actually playing, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as they realized no one was going to hurt them. An older woman next to me, she'd been a shopkeeper in Naha before the war, spoke what we were all thinking. They told us the Americans would torture us, rape us, kill us. They gave us grenades to kill ourselves with. I used mine, another woman whispered. Before we fled to the caves, my husband pulled the pin to save us from the Americans, but it didn't go off. The fuse was bad. We ran instead. She started crying. He died anyway. Artillery. 3 days later. But he died, trying to save us from something that wasn't real. We sat in silence, processing the weight of that. How many died believing the lies? Someone asked. How many killed themselves? Jumped from cliffs? Died for nothing? I thought of my students, of families I'd taught about honorable death, of the propaganda I'd helped spread. Too many, I whispered. As darkness fell, the Marines set up lights, generators powering floodlights that turned night into day. We weren't used to light anymore. It felt strange, exposed, but also safe in a way we'd forgotten existed. A Marine officer, captain's bars on his collar, moved through the camp with a translator, explaining what would happen next. Tomorrow, we transport you to a civilian internment camp, not a prison camp, a refugee camp. You will have shelter, food, medical care. You will be safe. The battle is ending. Japan will surrender soon. When it's safe, you will be able to return to your homes, or what remains of them. What about the Japanese soldiers? Someone asked. What will you do to them? Soldiers who surrender will be treated as prisoners of war, according to international law. Soldiers who continue fighting will be fought. But civilians, you are not combatants. You will not be harmed. Why should we believe you? An old man challenged. You are the enemy. The captain looked tired. Through the translator, he said, because we have no reason to lie to you now. The war is over. We won. You lost. We could kill you all if that was our intention. You're unarmed, starving, defeated, but we're not going to. Because that's not who we are. That's not what we do. He paused, then added, your own military told you we were monsters to keep you fighting, to keep you scared, to make you choose death over surrender. But we're just men doing a job, and our job now is to help you survive. That's all. Later, as people settled in for the night under American tents, I found the red-haired Marine who'd first given me water. He was on guard duty, but smiled when he saw me approach. Miss Nakamura, he said. You feeling better? Yes. Thank you. I paused, searching for words. What is your name? Private James Sullivan. But everyone calls me Red. He pointed to his hair, grinning. Sullivan-san, I said, trying to pronounce it correctly. Why you so kind, to us? He looked puzzled by the question. Why wouldn't I be? We are enemy. You're a teacher who got caught in a war, he said simply. That's different from being an enemy. My mom's a teacher back in Iowa. She'd be horrified if I wasn't kind to another teacher, enemy country or not. But the war is soldiers killing soldiers, he said firmly. Not soldiers killing teachers and farmers and kids. That's not war. That's murder. We don't do that. I wanted to tell him that his side had killed plenty of civilians in the bombing raids, in the naval bombardments, in the battle for Okinawa itself. That war didn't distinguish between soldiers and teachers as clearly as he thought, but I also understood what he meant. There was a difference between civilians dying as collateral damage in a battle and deliberately targeting them for extermination. There was a difference between the accidental deaths of war and the intentional deaths my own government had encouraged through its suicide propaganda. I taught children lies, I told him quietly, about America, about you. I told them you would torture them, kill them, that death was better than capture. Sullivan's face grew serious. And now I know I was wrong. But children I taught, they are dead. They believed me. They died believing lies I taught them. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, so teach different now. Teach truth. Tell the children who survived what's real. That's how you make it right. I can't make it right, I said. Some things can't be fixed. No, Sullivan agreed. But you can try to do better going forward. That's all any of us can do. That night, lying under an American tent, with American blankets, having eaten American food, I couldn't sleep. I thought about Kenji with his gap-toothed smile, about Mariko in the front row, about all 42 students in my class. How many were still alive? How many had believed the propaganda so completely that they'd killed themselves rather than surrender? How many were hiding in caves, starving, waiting for death rather than accepting help? And how many had died directly because I had taught them to fear the very people who could have saved them? The guilt was crushing. The knowledge that I'd been a tool of propaganda, that I'd spread lies that killed children, was almost unbearable. But Sullivan's words echoed in my mind. Teach different now. Teach truth. Could I? Could a person who'd taught lies be trusted to teach truth? I didn't know, but I knew I had to try. Because the alternative, living with the guilt and doing nothing to change it, was a worse death than anything the battle could have delivered. Tomorrow, we would be transported to the civilian camp. Tomorrow, I would begin the impossible task of figuring out how to live with what I'd done. Tomorrow, I would start learning to teach truth instead of lies. If the children who survived would ever trust me again. June 20th, 1945. Civilian internment camp, Southern Okinawa. The camp wasn't what I expected. I'd imagined prison, barbed wire, guards with guns, punishment for being on the losing side. Instead, I found rows of large tents, organized streets between them, distribution points for food and water, and a medical tent that never seemed to close. We were prisoners, technically, but we were also refugees being kept alive by the people we'd been taught to hate. The cognitive dissonance was still overwhelming. I was assigned to Tent 47 with 11 other women, mostly from different villages, all survivors of the battle's final weeks. We had cots, blankets, and access to communal washing facilities. Compared to the cave, it was paradise. Compared to my life before the war, it was poverty. But I was alive, fed, safe. That alone felt like an impossible gift I didn't deserve. June 20th, 1945. Second day in the camp. They gave us rice today. Real rice, not the substitute grains we'd been eating for months. I cried while eating it. I don't know if the tears were gratitude or shame. The camp held approximately 3,000 civilians by the end of June, with more arriving daily as Marines continued clearing caves and securing the southern tip of the island. Most were women, children, and elderly. The men were either dead, missing, or held in separate POW camps if they'd been combatants. The Americans ran the camp with military efficiency, but also with something I hadn't expected: concern for our welfare. Medical staff treated everyone who needed it. Infections, wounds, malnutrition, disease. Food was distributed regularly. Water was clean and plentiful. Children were given extra rations. It wasn't generosity exactly. It was policy. Systematic decency applied to defeated enemies, because that's what the Geneva Convention and American military regulations required. But to us, starving and traumatized, it felt like mercy. On my third day in the camp, a Marine corporal with a clipboard found me during the morning rice distribution. "Yuki Nakamura?" he asked, checking his list. "Yes, you're listed as a teacher. Elementary school, English language skills. That correct?" My heart sank. They were going to interrogate me about the propaganda I'd taught, about collaboration with militarism, about my role in the war effort. "Yes," I said quietly. "I taught children, before the battle." "Good," he said, seeming pleased rather than accusatory. "We need teachers. Lots of kids here. No school. Captain Harris wants to start education program. You interested?" I stared at him. "You want me to teach? Again? If you're willing, pay is in food rations, extra rice, protein, and it gives you something to do besides sit around. Kids need normalcy, need to know there's a future. I taught them lies, I said, needing him to understand. I taught propaganda. I told children Americans were devils, that death was better than surrender. The corporal looked uncomfortable. Yeah, well, that was before. This is now. Captain thinks education is important for reconstruction, thinks teachers who survive should teach. Past is past. You interested or not, the past is past. As if 28 years of propaganda could be dismissed that easily. As if the dead children didn't matter. As if my guilt could be erased by a simple decision to teach again. But what was the alternative? Sit in a tent, paralyzed by guilt, doing nothing. Yes, I said. I will teach. Report to Tent 12 at 0900 tomorrow. That's the education tent. Captain Harris will brief you. He made a note on his clipboard and moved on to the next name on his list, leaving me standing there wondering what I'd just agreed to. Captain Charles Harris was a tall, thin man in his 40s with wire-rimmed glasses and the patient demeanor of someone who'd been a teacher before the war. He sat behind a makeshift desk in Tent 12, surrounded by boxes of salvaged books, school supplies requisitioned from military stocks, and rough plans for an education program. Miss Nakamura, he greeted me when I arrived the next morning. Thank you for volunteering. Please, sit. I sat on a camp stool across from him, hands folded in my lap, trying to appear composed while anxiety churned in my stomach. I understand you taught elementary school before the battle, Harris said in careful but comprehensible Japanese. What subjects? All subjects, I replied in English, deciding to use it even though my accent was heavy. In Japanese elementary school, one teacher teaches all subjects to same class. Reading, writing, mathematics, history, science. Also, English language, beginning in 4th year. Your English is quite good, Harris observed. I studied at normal school, teacher training. English was required subject. Excellent. He pulled out a paper covered in handwritten notes. Here's what we're trying to do. Basic education for children in the camp. Reading, writing, arithmetic. Some English language instruction to help with communication. But mostly, we want to give kids structure, normalcy, something to do besides dwell on trauma. He paused, studying me. I also want to provide education that isn't propaganda. That's going to be challenging given that all of you were trained in the old system. Can you do that? Can you teach without the militaristic content? It was a fair question. Could I separate education from propaganda when the two had been so thoroughly intertwined in the Japanese system? I will try, I said honestly. But I need to know. What should I teach about America? About the war? Children will ask questions. What do I tell them? Harris considered this carefully. Tell them the truth. The war happened. Japan and America were enemies. Many people died on both sides. Now the war is ending. We have to figure out how to live together peacefully. That's the truth, isn't it? Some will say truth is Japan was right. America was wrong. And some Americans say America was right. Japan was wrong, Harris replied. But kids don't need to decide who was right. They just need to learn to read, write, think for themselves. That's what education should be. Teaching people how to think, not what to think. The distinction was subtle but profound. I'd been trained to teach children what to think, that Japan was superior, that the emperor was divine, that military sacrifice was the highest virtue. Harris was suggesting something else entirely, teaching children the tools to reach their own conclusions. That is difficult, I said quietly. That is not how I was trained to teach. I know, Harris said, not unkindly. But you survived this war. These kids survived this war. You all have a chance to do something different now. Interested? I thought about Kenji and Mariko and the other 40 children I'd taught propaganda to. About how many had died believing lies I'd helped spread. Yes, I said. I will try to teach different. Good. Harris handed me a stack of salvaged textbooks, mostly damaged but usable. Start with basics. Reading, writing, numbers. I'm assigning you the 6 to 9 age group. About 30 kids currently in camp. We've designated that area. He pointed to a cleared space outside the tent, as your classroom. We don't have desks yet, but we have some mats and slates. Make it work. He stood, indicating the meeting was over. Oh, and Miss Nakamura? The kids are scared and traumatized. Some lost parents. Some saw terrible things. Be patient. Be kind. That's more important than curriculum right now. I nodded, taking the books, and left the tent. I was a teacher again. But this time, I had to figure out how to teach truth after years of teaching lies. My first class met the next morning. 32 children ages 6 to 9, all survivors of the battle's horrors. They sat on straw mats in the designated area, looking up at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to mistrust. Some I recognized from Shuri, though none had been my students directly. Others were from villages I'd never visited. All were dressed in salvage clothing, too big or too small, mismatched and makeshift. All were too thin, too old for their years, with eyes that had seen too much. I stood before them, holding a piece of chalk and a salvage slate board, and realized I had no idea how to begin. The old way would have been to start with patriotic songs, with lessons about Japanese superiority, with stories of military heroes, but I couldn't do that anymore. Those lessons had killed children, so I started with something simpler. My name is Nakamura Yuki, I said in Japanese. I am teacher. Before the war, I taught elementary school in Shuri. During the war, I hid in caves and was very scared. Now I am here, like you. I am going to teach you reading, writing, and mathematics. Do you have questions? Every hand went up. You first, I said, pointing to a small girl in the front. Is the war over? Almost. Fighting on Okinawa is mostly finished. Soon there will be official end to war. Did we win? A boy asked. The question hung in the air. The truth was obvious. The Americans had won. Japan had lost. But saying it felt like betrayal. Yet lying felt worse. No, I said quietly. Japan did not win. But war ending means surviving. Surviving means chance to rebuild. Are the Americans going to kill us? Another child asked, voice trembling. No, I said firmly. Americans are not going to kill you. They are giving us food, water, medicine. They are helping us survive. I know you were told different things. I taught different things, but I was wrong. The Americans are not devils. They are just people like us, who also want the war to end. An older boy, maybe 9, raised his hand with obvious skepticism. My father said Americans eat Japanese people, that they torture prisoners. Your father was told lies, I said gently. We were all told lies. By our government, by our military, by people like me who believed those lies and taught them to you. But they were not true. I have eaten food given by Americans. I have been treated by American doctors. I am alive because Americans helped me. That is the truth. The children looked uncertain, torn between what they'd been taught and what they were experiencing. This is hard to understand, I continued. You were taught one thing, but reality is different. That is confusing. But part of learning is being willing to change your mind when you learn new information. That is what I am doing. I am changing my mind based on what I see. I hope you will do the same. A small girl started crying. My mother said to die rather than be captured, but we were captured. And she's dead. And I'm alive, and I don't know if I was supposed to die too. I knelt down beside her, fighting my own tears. You were supposed to survive. Your mother wanted you to survive. Sometimes adults make mistakes because they are scared. Your mother was scared. But you surviving is not a mistake. You surviving is important. But teacher said, another child began. Teachers were wrong, I interrupted gently. I was wrong. Other teachers were wrong. We taught you things that were not true because we believed them, or because we were afraid to teach differently. But we were wrong. And now we have to learn to teach truth instead. This was the moment of transformation. Admitting to children that adults had lied, that teachers had been wrong, that everything they'd been taught needed to be questioned. It was terrifying. It was necessary. So what is true? The skeptical boy asked. That is what we will learn together, I said. Starting with simple things. Letters, numbers, reading, writing, and thinking carefully about what we are told. Always asking questions. Always looking for truth. That is what school should be. I turned to the slate board and wrote the first hiragana character. This is A, I said. The first sound. the beginning of learning to read. Reading is power. Reading means you can learn for yourself, think for yourself, decide for yourself what is true. So we start here, with A, and slowly, tentatively, the children began to repeat after me. A. It was just one sound, one character, one small beginning, but it was teaching truth after years of teaching lies. It was something. The weeks that followed fell into routine. Morning classes with the children, basic reading, writing, arithmetic. Afternoons helping in the medical tent or with food distribution. Evenings sitting with other women, sharing stories, processing trauma. The camp population fluctuated as more civilians were found and brought in, and as some were gradually released to return to what remained of their homes. By mid-July, the fighting had officially ended on Okinawa. By August, rumors began circulating about Japan's imminent surrender. And through it all, I taught. I taught children who'd lost parents, who'd watched family members die, who'd been taught to fear and hate Americans, and were now living under American care. I taught without propaganda, without militarism, without lies about Japanese superiority or American devilry. I taught reading and writing and arithmetic, and how to think critically about what they were told. It was harder than I'd expected. The old curriculum had been simple. Here are the facts, memorize them, recite them back. The new approach required constant questions. How do we know this is true? What evidence supports this? Could there be other explanations? Many children struggled with this. They wanted clear answers, absolute truths, authority figures to tell them what to think. Uncertainty was frightening, but uncertainty was also honest. Sensei, Tomoko, a 7-year-old who'd lost both parents, asked one day during reading practice, "Why did the war happen?" It was the question I'd been dreading. The question I didn't have a good answer for. "That is a complicated question," I said carefully. Different people would give you different answers. Some would say it was about resources. Japan needed oil and other supplies. Some would say it was about power, nations wanting to control other nations. Some would say it was about ideology, different beliefs about how society should work. The truth is probably all of these things and more. But who started it? Another child asked. Who is to blame? Both sides made decisions that led to war, I said. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. But there were many decisions before that, by many nations, that created the situation where war seemed like an option. Blame is complicated. Our old teachers said America forced us to war, a boy noted. And American teachers probably say Japan forced them to war, I replied. Both believe they are telling the truth. That is why it is important to learn to think carefully about what you are told, to look for evidence, to consider different perspectives. That's confusing, Tomoko complained. Yes, I agreed. Truth is often confusing. Lies are usually simple. That is one way to tell them apart. Private Sullivan, Red, sometimes visited my classes when he was off duty. He'd sit in the back, watching with a gentle smile as I struggled through teaching in a new way. You're doing good, he told me after one particularly difficult class, where I'd fumbled trying to explain why Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor without either justifying it or demonizing my own country. I feel like I am failing, I admitted. I don't know how to teach truth when truth is complicated. That's because you're actually teaching now, Red said. Before, you were just repeating propaganda. That's easy, no thinking required. Real teaching is hard because you have to think, and you have to teach kids to think. That's way more difficult. You sound like a teacher yourself. My mom is, he said, grinning. I grew up hearing about the challenges. She always said the hardest part of teaching wasn't covering the material. It was getting kids to actually think about it instead of just memorizing it. She sounds wise. She is. I hope I can introduce you someday, after all this is over. She'd like you. The idea that there could be an after, a time when Japanese teachers and American soldiers' mothers could meet and talk as colleagues, seemed impossible, but maybe no more impossible than anything else that had happened. August 15th, 1945, the day that changed everything again. The announcement came over the camp's loudspeaker system in English, then translated into Japanese. Emperor Hirohito had accepted the terms of the Potsdam Declaration. Japan had surrendered unconditionally. The war was over. The reaction in the camp was complex. Relief that the dying had stopped. grief for all that had been lost, confusion about what came next, and for many, including me, a strange emptiness. Everything we'd been taught to believe, that Japan was invincible, that the emperor was divine, that military victory was destiny, had been revealed as lies. The foundation of our entire worldview had collapsed. That evening, I gathered my students for an unscheduled class. They needed to process this, needed guidance, needed something. The war is over, I told them. Japan has surrendered. This means no more fighting, no more dying. That is good news. But we lost, a boy said, voice thick with shame. Yes, we lost. That is hard to accept. But losing the war is not the same as losing everything. You are still alive. That matters. Japan will still exist. That matters. We have a chance to rebuild, to do things differently, to create something better. That matters most of all. What will happen to us? Tomoko asked. I don't know exactly, I admitted, but I believe we will be allowed to go home, or to find new homes. We will rebuild our lives. It will be hard, but we will do it together. Will you still teach us? Another child asked. The question caught me off guard. Would I? Could I? Should I be allowed to? After what I'd done. But looking at those 30 young faces, all watching me with varying degrees of hope and fear, I realized the answer was obvious. Yes, I said, if you want me to. If your families allow it. If I am able to. Yes, I will teach you, because education is how we rebuild. Learning to think critically, to seek truth, to question what we are told. That is how we make sure something like this war never happens again. Promise? Tomoko asked. I wanted to. I wanted to promise that I'd always be there, that I'd never let them down again, that I'd always teach them truth. But I'd made promises before that I hadn't kept. I promise I will try, I said instead. I will try my very best to teach you truth, to help you learn to think, to be the teacher you deserve. That is all I can promise. But I will mean it with all my heart. It would have to be enough. September 1945. The camp began emptying as civilians were gradually released and allowed to return to their homes, or what remained of them. The American occupation government was establishing itself, organizing relief efforts, beginning the massive task of reconstruction. I was released in early September and returned to Shuri. The city I'd known was gone. The castle was rubble. The school where I'd taught was a crater. Most buildings were destroyed or damaged beyond repair, but people were returning, starting to rebuild, finding ways to survive. I found shelter in a partially intact building and immediately sought out any children I could find. Within a week, I had 20 students meeting in a makeshift classroom, part of a damaged building with no roof, but with walls still standing. We had no desks, no books, almost no supplies. I taught with charcoal on broken slate, with improvised materials, with whatever we could scavenge. But I taught. I taught reading and writing and arithmetic. I taught without propaganda, without militarism, without lies about racial superiority or divine destiny. I taught children to question what they were told, to think critically, to seek evidence, to remain uncertain rather than blindly confident. And slowly, word spread. More children came. Then adults wanting to learn English to work with the occupation forces. Then other teachers asking how to teach in this new way, without the propaganda that had defined education for decades. By October, I was running multiple classes throughout the day. By November, other teachers had joined me, learning together how to educate rather than indoctrinate. It was exhausting. It was barely sustainable. It was necessary. December 1945. Red Sullivan found me one afternoon, appearing at my makeshift classroom in full uniform, grinning with that familiar warmth. Miss Nakamura, heard you were back teaching. Sullivan-san. I was surprised by how happy I was to see him. Yes, many children need education. So I teach. That's great. He looked around at the damaged building, the improvised setup, the children watching him with curious wariness. Tough conditions, though. We manage. Is better than cave. He laughed. Yeah, I guess that's true. Hey, reason I came. My unit is shipping out next week. Back to the States. I wanted to say goodbye, and to give you this. He handed me a package wrapped in cloth. Inside were school supplies, real pencils, paper, chalk, even some children's books in Japanese. How? I started. Called in some favors, traded some cigarettes. Figure you can use this more than I can use cigarettes. He shrugged. Mom always said teachers are the most important people in any society. Wanted to make sure you had what you needed. I felt tears threatening and fought them back. Thank you. This is very generous. No problem. He looked at the children, then back at me. You know, when we first found you in that cave, I wasn't sure you'd make it. You looked pretty far gone. But look at you now, teaching again, helping kids, rebuilding. You're tougher than you thought. I had good help, I said. You gave me food when I couldn't move, gave me water when I thought I would die, gave me reason to keep trying. Thank you for that. Just doing my job, he said, but his ears turned red, embarrassed by the gratitude. No, I said firmly. You saved my life. You and other Marines. You gave food to your enemies. Treated us like humans when we expected death. That was not just job. That was choice to be kind. Thank you. Red nodded, accepting it. Well, you're doing good work now. Teaching these kids truth instead of propaganda. That's how you really defeat bad ideas. Not by killing everyone who believed them, but by teaching the next generation to think differently. You're doing that. That matters. I hope so, I said quietly. I hope teaching them now can balance the lies I taught before. It can't balance it, Red said honestly. Can't change the past, but you can make the future better. That's enough. We said our goodbyes. Formal, awkward, both of us aware that we'd probably never see each other again. He was going back to America, to Iowa, to a life I could barely imagine. I was staying in Okinawa, in the ruins, trying to rebuild something from the ashes. But our paths had crossed at a crucial moment, and that mattered. After he left, I showed the supplies to my students. Their faces lit up at the sight of real pencils, real paper. Who was that American? Tomoko asked. A friend, I said simply. A friend who helped me survive so I could teach you. I thought Americans were supposed to be devils, a boy said. So did I admitted. But I was wrong. Some Americans are kind. Some Japanese are cruel. Some are brave. Some are cowards. People are complicated. That is one of the most important lessons you can learn. April 1946. The cherry blossoms bloomed, somehow surviving in the devastation. It was a small reminder that life continued, that beauty persisted, that spring came even to places destroyed by war. My school had grown to over 60 students and 3 volunteer teachers. We'd moved to a slightly better building, still damaged, but with a roof. The occupation government had started providing some supplies and had recognized us as an official education center. I'd also been asked to participate in education reform committees, helping design new curriculum that would remove militaristic content and emphasize democratic values, critical thinking, and international understanding. It was strange being treated as an expert when I felt like I was still learning how to teach properly myself, but I shared what I'd learned, that education should teach people how to think, not what to think, that questioning authority was a sign of intelligence, not disrespect. That uncertainty was more honest than false certainty. One afternoon, a mother came to observe my class. She was considering enrolling her daughter, but wanted to see how I taught. After class, she approached me with tears in her eyes. My older daughter died during the battle, she said quietly. She was 10 years old. When the Americans came close, my husband said we should all kill ourselves. That capture meant worse than death. My older daughter believed him. She jumped from the cliff, but I couldn't do it. I grabbed my younger daughter and ran instead. We were captured by Marines. They gave us food and water. They saved our lives. She paused, composing herself. I heard you teach children to question what they are told, to think for themselves, to not blindly obey. Is that true? Yes, I said. I teach critical thinking, independence of mind. Good, she said fiercely. If my older daughter had been taught that, she might still be alive. She was taught to obey without question, taught that authority was always right, taught that death was preferable to thinking for herself, and it killed her. She looked at me directly. Teach my younger daughter to question. Teach her to think. Teach her to survive. That is what education should be. I will try. I promised. And I meant it. Epilogue. Shuri, Okinawa. I am 35 years old, the principal of a rebuilt elementary school that serves 200 students. We have real buildings now, desks, books, supplies. The American occupation has officially ended, though American bases remain throughout Okinawa. The school is different from the one I taught at before the war. We teach critical thinking alongside basic skills. We teach international understanding alongside national identity. We teach students to question rather than to merely obey. It's not perfect. Old habits die hard, and many parents still want education that emphasizes conformity and obedience. Some teachers struggle with the shift from indoctrination to education. But we're trying. Every day, we're trying to do better. In my office, I keep a photograph. One of the few possessions I've saved from the war years. It shows a group of children in my makeshift classroom in late 1945, sitting on mats in a roofless building, holding precious pencils, smiling despite everything they'd survived. Tomoko is in that photograph. She's 14 now, one of my best students, planning to become a teacher herself. Several other children from that first post-war class are still in school, learning, growing, preparing for futures their parents never imagined possible. They survived the war. They survived the lies. They're learning to think for themselves. That's the victory that matters most. Last week I received a letter, forwarded through military mail services, from Iowa. Red Sullivan had kept his promise to have his mother write me. She sent encouragement, teaching materials, and an invitation to correspond about education methods. "My son told me what you're doing," she wrote. "Teaching children to think critically after years of propaganda. That's the bravest kind of teaching. Please write back. I'd like to learn from you." An American teacher wanting to learn from me. The idea would have been impossible 7 years ago. Now it's just reality. This morning, I taught my current class about the Battle of Okinawa. Not propaganda, not heroic myths, just facts. The battle happened. Many people died. Americans, Japanese soldiers, and Okinawan civilians. It was terrible. It ended. We survived. "Why did so many civilians die?" a student asked. "Because we were caught between two armies," I explained. "Because we were told lies about what would happen if we surrendered. Because fear and propaganda can be as deadly as bullets." "Who was wrong?" another student asked. "Japan or America? Both made mistakes," I said. "Both caused deaths. War itself was wrong. That is what we must remember, not who to blame, but how to prevent it from happening again." "How do we do that?" they asked. "By learning to think critically. By questioning authority when it demands things that seem wrong. By valuing human life more than national honor. By choosing truth over propaganda. By remembering what happened and committing to do better." "Is that what you're teaching us?" a girl asked. "Yes," I said. "That is exactly what I'm teaching you. I taught lies once. I taught children that Americans were devils, that death was preferable to surrender, that obedience was the highest virtue, and children died because they believed me." I paused, making sure they understood. "I can't undo that. I can't bring those children back, but I can teach you differently. I can teach you to think, to question, to value life, to seek truth. That's what I'm doing now. That's what I'll do for the rest of my life." "Do you feel guilty?" one of the older students asked. "Every day," I admitted. "Every single day. But guilt without action is just self-pity. So I work. I teach. I try to do better. That's all any of us can do after we've made terrible mistakes. Acknowledge them, learn from them, and work to do better going forward." After class, I stood in the schoolyard and looked at the rebuilt castle in the distance, still under reconstruction, but rising again from the rubble. Around me, children played, laughed, argued, lived. They would never know the weight of propaganda the way my generation did. They would never be taught to die for honor. They would be taught to think, to question, to live. That was the lesson of the war. That was the lesson I'd learned too late. That was the lesson I would teach for the rest of my life. I couldn't move when the Marines gave me my first meal in a week. I was paralyzed by the realization that everything I'd believed, everything I'd taught, had been lies. But eventually, I did move. I ate. I survived. I learned. I changed. And now I teach others to do the same, to question what they're told, to seek truth even when it's uncomfortable, to choose life and thought over death and obedience. It's not redemption. I don't deserve redemption, but it's something. It's teaching truth after years of teaching lies. It's the only way I know to honor the children who died believing what I taught them, by making sure no future children die for the same lies. If this story moved you, if it changed how you think about propaganda, education, and the responsibility teachers have to their students, please subscribe, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. How do we teach truth after lies? How do we rebuild after believing propaganda? What responsibility do educators have to admit when they were wrong? These questions matter now as much as they did in 1945. In an era of misinformation and polarization, the lesson of Okinawa remains urgent. Teach people how to think, not what to think. Question authority. Seek evidence. Value truth over comfortable lies. That's how we prevent the next tragedy. Thanks for listening to this difficult but necessary story. See you in the next one.